The problem is we spend too much money, we have too much debt, we monetize the debt because we have a central bank that is there for the purpose of financing big government. So the welfare system continues, the bubbles keep building in the entire system, as well as financing the wars. Unless they address that and instead just concentrate on these superficial things, we will not solve our problems, and we will see a continuation. If they can keep it together for another year or two, just means the bubble is going to be that much bigger and the crash will be that much worse. But most people in the country, even those who are making money in the stock market, know there's something wrong out there, and they're preparing psychologically as well as they're struggling to protect themselves financially because they know this can't last.
This market could go down a lot.
How much is a lot?
Well, we could have a bear market. We haven't had one in a long time. That's a 20% decline because we've had this Yellen put. The Fed wouldn't let the market go down when Obama was president. They certainly didn't want it to go down before the election because they wanted to put Hillary Clinton into the Oval Office after Obama. So they had the markets back. There was this put. But what if the put expired with Donald Trump? I don't know if the Fed has much love for Trump. And now that Trump has put his brand on this stock market and this economy, maybe the Fed is happy to allow a bear market that can be blamed on Trump. The Fed did not have to do the type of economic stimulus that it did in 2009, 2010. That's why the economy never healed. That's why we're in worse trouble today than we were back then. And remember, the Federal Reserve created the housing bubble. They're the reason we had a financial crisis. It was their economic policy that began early in the Bush era. When we bursted the dot-com bubble, they deliberately inflated the housing bubble. They kicked the can down the road, and we caught up to the can in 2008, and then they kicked it again. And we're going to catch up to it now under Trump. But unfortunately, I think the powers that be, including the Fed, are already ready to blame this disaster on Donald Trump. He's the fall guy, and he has taken their bait by talking about how great the stock market is, by talking about how great the economy is. The stock market is a bubble, and the economy is a disaster. He shouldn't want to own this disaster. He should still be blaming how bad things are on Obama and the Fed, but he's not doing that anymore.
All right, so what is the black swan risk coming in the next 6 weeks or so? We know the next 6 weeks are historically bad for the markets. We now have Goldman Sachs coming out saying there's a 50% chance of a government shutdown, which is not exactly a decisive forecast. So is it the government shutdown that could be the black swan, or could it be something else?
Well, I doubt the government's going to shut down. I actually think that would be a positive. If we shut down the economy, we could liberate the economy. So my fear is that the government won't shut down. It'll just get bigger and bigger and bigger. But what might be the black swan is if the market surrenders the Trump euphoric rally. Remember, we've had a huge move up since the election of Trump, even though prior to the election, the expectation was if Trump won, it was a disaster, yet he won anyway. And then, the markets rallied because of the idea that we were going to get all this deregulation, these significant tax reform, all this stimulus. Well, if people start to realize that that's not going to happen, that the market's built in events that are not going to transpire, we didn't get rid of Obamacare. That was supposed to happen. We're not going to get substantive tax reform. We'll be lucky if we even get tax cuts by the end of the year. We're not going to get the massive regulatory relief. So what if we price all that back out of the market? And what if there's no Yellen put? That's a big drop in the market. The drop in the dollar can continue. And then, this whole supposed strong economy that Trump is talking about is all based on confidence. Well, it's all false confidence.
If a U.S. economic collapse occurs, it will happen quickly. No one will predict that day. That's because the signs of imminent economic collapse are difficult to see. For example, the U.S. economy almost collapsed on September 17, 2008. That's the day panicked investors withdrew a record $140 billion from money market accounts, which is where businesses keep cash to fund day-to-day operations. If withdrawals had gone on for even a week, the entire economy would have halted. That meant trucks would stop rolling, grocery stores would run out of food and businesses would shut down. For more, see September 2008 run on the money markets. Fortunately, the Federal Reserve Chairman and U.S. Treasury Secretary noticed the signal and knew what it meant. Ben Bernanke was a Great Depression scholar. Hank Paulson was a Wall Street veteran. Their bailout plan supplied enough cash to stop the panic. For more, see 2008 financial crisis.
The Fed was created to address financial panics, and its independence and its ability to act quickly is a key feature of what the Fed is about. And if we had not done that, and if the financial system had imploded and the economy had plunged into even a deeper depression, I think the populist reaction would have been pretty bad as well. So we were kind of stuck one way or the other. So we did the right thing, I hope. We tried to do the right thing.
Another example occurred during the Great Depression. On Thursday, October 24th, the 1929 stock market crash began. By Tuesday, the market had lost 25%. Many investors lost their life savings that weekend. The Dow didn't recover until 1954. That's how close the U.S. economy came to a real collapse, and how vulnerable it is to another one.
We are in a big, fat, ugly bubble. We have the worst financial recovery in 65 years. In the last 8 years, the past administration has put on more new debt than nearly all of the other presidents combined.
Everything in a way is a bubble, and the currency situation is in a bubble, and that's why there's not room for optimism about the current system.
The global situation has created an environment for financial panic.
The U.S. stock market is going to crash, or the dollar is going to crash.
It's the biggest bubble I've seen in history, and now we have a bigger stock bubble by far than ever, larger real estate bubbles in many cities, and extreme around the world.
So when is this going to happen?
Later this year or next.
Later this year or next.
Write it down.
And how big a crash could we be looking at?
It's going to be the worst in your lifetime.
I've had some pretty big ones in my lifetime. It's long.
It's going to be the biggest in my lifetime, and I'm older than you. No, it's going to be serious stuff.
I think the next crisis is going to kill the dollar.
And the worst scenario for that would be things like Zimbabwe and Venezuela.
What will happen if the U.S. economy collapses? If the economy collapses, you will not have access to credit. Banks will close. That means demand will outstrip supply of food, gas, and other necessities. If the collapse affects local governments and utilities, then water and electricity will no longer be available. As people panic, self-defense becomes more important. The economy reverts to a traditional economy where those who grow food barter for other services. A U.S. economic collapse would create global panic. Demand for the dollar and U.S. treasuries would plummet. Interest rates would skyrocket. Investors would rush to other currencies such as the yuan, euro, or even gold. It would create not just inflation, but hyperinflation as the dollar became dirt cheap. When would the U.S. economy collapse? Any of the following 6 scenarios could create an economic collapse. 1. If the U.S. dollar rapidly loses value, it would create hyperinflation. 2. A bank run could force banks to close or even go out of business, cutting off lending and even cash withdrawals. 3. The internet could become paralyzed with a super virus, preventing emails and online transactions. 4. Terrorist attacks or a massive oil embargo could halt interstate trucking. Grocery stores would soon run out of food. 5. Widespread violence erupts across the nation. That could range from intercity riots, a civil war, or a foreign military attack. It's possible that a combination of these events could overwhelm the government's ability to prevent or respond to a collapse. And number 6, some believe the Federal Reserve, the President, or an international conspiracy are driving the United States towards economic ruin. If that's the case, the economy could collapse in as little as a week. That's because it's run on confidence that debts will be repaid. food and gas will be available when you need it, and that you'll get paid for this week's work. If a large enough piece of that stops for even several days, it creates a chain reaction that leads to a rapid collapse. How to prepare for a collapse. It's difficult to completely protect yourself from the economic collapse because it can happen without warning. In most catastrophes, people survive through their knowledge, wits, and by helping each other. You need to understand basic economic concepts so you can see warning signs of instability. Second, keep as many assets as liquid as possible so you can withdraw them within a week. In addition to your regular job, make sure you have skills that you need in a traditional economy, such as farming, cooking, or repair. Make sure your passport is current in case you need to leave the country on short notice. To be completely prepared, research target countries now and travel there on vacation so you are familiar with your destination. Keep yourself in top physical shape. Know basic survival skills such as self-defense, foraging, hunting, and farming. Practice now with camping trips. If you can, move near a wildlife preserve in a temperate climate. That way, if a collapse occurs, you can live off the land in a relatively unpopulated area. As for cash, it's almost pointless to have it in a real economic collapse because its value might be decimated. Gold isn't much help because it's heavy to transport and useless in a real survival situation. But it would be good to have a stash of silver and gold coins just in case. During many crisis situations, these have been acceptable bribes. Now, we just can't show this information to anyone, so please be sure to get the proper clearance by pressing the big red subscribe button. While you're at it, be sure to activate the notifications so you're always in the know when it comes to our future releases.